Well, welcome to Enter the Word. Hey, Gordy.
Hey,
Hey, this is Gordy Williams. Would you introduce yourself and your position and your church?
sure. So my name is Gordy Williams. I'm the senior pastor of Harvard Avenue Evangelical Free Church in Villa Park, which is just outside of Chicago.
Okay, yeah. You're like 20 miles exactly or something like that.
It's pretty close, yeah.
Yeah, west. I looked it up, looked up the city where you are.
I could
And
see
it's-
the Sears Tower on a clear day.
Okay, yeah. And yeah, that's a nice area.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and this is I'm a Salvation Army officer. So we have two different ways of presenting ourselves as pastors, I guess, in some ways,
Uh-huh.
because it's just different kind of different roles. But what we're talking about in it is this article that came out, and we're going to be contrasting it with a different article. But in this article, and I'll show you what it looks like. This is the article here. Dear Pastor, please don't quit on it. Don't quit on us now. And this article is based on some stats that people are seeing that show that there are a lot of pastors right now who have their resignation letters written and just haven't hit send.
Mm-hmm.
And it's apparently rampant. And this is a serious situation. So people are concerned about the stress level that COVID-19 has presented.
2020 has not been a friendly year. I think everybody is looking for the reset button, and it just isn't there.
Yeah,
it isn't just right. COVID. Everything in our culture is tumultuous and rocky and bumpy at the moment.
Yeah.
2020 is it's a rough year to be in life. It's a rough year to be in ministry.
It is, and it's and right now, by the way, you and I are we're online at the time when the Breonna Taylor situation is about to be presented from the court. It was supposed to be, I think somebody said 1:30, which would have been half an hour ago for us because we're in Central Time, so it's 1 p.m. here, it's 2 p.m. there.
Right.
So we're probably competing with some of that, and people are really concerned about that.
Well, they should. I mean, the mayor already declared a state of emergency before anything was even read.
Yeah. And so this even is a stress for pastors because pastors are having to deal with how do you talk about this to your church?
Sure.
Things are very political right now. Everything's political. Remember, we talked about Rob Bell last time. I remember he had that talk where he said everything is spiritual. I think everything now is political.
Yeah, not that those two things can be divided, of course, but that is one of the things that is touched on in the article. All of these upheavals that are happening in our culture. It's not just COVID, it's race relations, it's everything. And of course, we're in an election year.
Yeah.
Almost all of those issues fall along fairly predictable partisan lines in our culture. Yeah. There's this very much this us versus them mentality that I don't remember it being like this at any other time in my life. Not like this, anyway.
Oh, no. Yeah, I don't remember this either. And I definitely don't remember the lack of what seems to be a lack of grace in some ways.
Yeah. Civility died.
Yeah. It's interesting you said civility. My wife and I, we were getting in the vehicle the other day, and I thought, what happened to chivalry?
Right.
And, and I think part of what happened to chivalry was electric locks. And the reason why I think that, and this is kind of a side note, but it's interesting because we have this pickup truck on our fleet because the Salvation Army has a fleet of vehicles that we use.
Sure.
And this pickup truck is a work truck. So for my wife to get in, if I'm driving, I have to go around and unlock her door first, which was which was chivalrous, right?
Yeah.
And she gets in the car and I shut the door and go around. But if we get any of our other two vehicles that are ours to use, they have electric locks, so I just hit the button. I don't ever open the door.
Yeah, get in the car.
Yeah, just get in the car. In fact, she'll stand there and wait till the air conditioners run. She's like, I'm not getting in that car yet, So opening the door doesn't help much. But I just think it's interesting that electric locks had something to do with the demise of chivalry.
First, we shape our tools, then our tools shape us.
That's right.
That's exactly how that happens.
Well, let's go through this article.
All righty.
And it starts off with this, and I wanted to go through the article with the folks. So sure. I'm gonna pull this up here. And first, I'm going to tell you it's written by D. Scott Hildreth, and you'll notice that a lot of authors get rid of their first name and put the initial and then use their middle name. That's kind of a cool thing to do.
Yep.
So
from here on out, I am G. Paul Williams,
and I'm J. Paul Gainey.
Oh.
All right. So it says the statistics are horrifying. This is what it says, and the story is gut wrenching. If something doesn't change, the American church will face unprecedented challenges in the next year. Many local congregations will not survive. What's the tragedy? The growing realization that a significant percentage of pastors are considering leaving their churches. So in July, Chuck Lawless sounded a warning in his post, which was called 6 Reasons Why Some Pastors May Resign soon after the COVID crisis. That's
I read that
stuff.
article. The 6 reasons that he lays out in that other article, I think of all of them, the average church in America is still only 75 people. And small church ministry, it's difficult ministry. Our church is around 100 people. Yep, that's the one right there. Mm-hmm. And when you look at number 4, some pastors of churches struggling before COVID are now facing the reality of their church struggling even more. And so ministry was already hard. COVID has not made things easier. And as a matter of fact, after this year, things might even be more difficult. And so if you were already feeling like you were up against it running into 2020, like now you're just swimming, hoping to find the surface again, it can be an overwhelming thing. And so what do you do if you're a pastor in that kind of a situation? You start looking for a place where you think the grass is greener. I think that that's a fallacy. I don't know in 2020 that green grass exists. I don't know that every church you go to in America is going to be struggling with the reality of COVID and the political climate and the new civil rights movement. Like this exists everywhere. There isn't a way to get away from it. And I think that's part of what is making pastors just feel like they're in over their heads.
Yeah, I think so too. And it was funny. Somebody in passing conversation said in a way that was almost like, "Oh, in this normal conversation," and this person says to my wife, "So, are you a Republican or Democrat?" Like, I don't answer that question. All right, as pastors, first of all, we're somewhat apolitical, and we have to be careful of our positions on some of these things. And this is what this article's talking about.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, whatever you think, whatever your opinion on these matters, you lose half your congregation.
Yeah. So where I live and do ministry, I think that is very much the reality of my church. Every issue falls very predictably along partisan lines. And so when all of this COVID stuff happened, I mean, I didn't have to put out too many fires, but the first ministry that we closed down in our church was a food pantry. And it was because most of the people who serve in our food pantry, they're older folks. They have lots of comorbidities, and trying to handle that ministry, I mean, it became untenable very quickly. And so when we closed our food pantry, that was when we had the first blowback. And it was exactly what you would expect. You're worldly, you're faithless. And then as time went on, I could see my congregation kind of dividing along some of those partisan lines. Is COVID real? I mean, I have people in my congregation that were pretty convinced at the beginning that COVID was a hoax. And so how do you do ministry in that environment? And I don't feel like I'm under attack, but I do feel the burden of trying to balance all of these perspectives. Like, okay, you think COVID is a hoax, that's fine. I still need you to wear a mask. Even if you think that the mask is not going to do anybody any good, I still want you to wear the mask, and I want you to wear the mask for the sake of somebody else. It's not about us. We're going to be others focused. But even that, I do feel like I'm fighting some kind of a political battle, even doing that.
Yeah. I went into a Starbucks the other day.
Oh, yeah.
It was the first time I've been in a Starbucks. I can't tell you the last time I was in a Starbucks.
Right.
But we have a 16-year-old daughter who likes Starbucks.
We
went to a meeting with somebody there, and of course you go in and we have our masks on, and
right.
There's nobody in there in the restaurant itself, right, except us, the three of us who are in this meeting. And of course, to drink our coffee, you can't have a mask on. So we're sitting in the corner, and the people that are working behind the counters, they have these huge glass covers and all that. So I got up for a second to walk across and grab a napkin or something. And I'm telling you, I felt like they were coming after me, and it was alarming. Yeah. I mean, there's nobody in here. We're already, our masks are off. We're sitting at that table over there. You said nothing. Yeah. But if I walk across the room, sir, please put on your, oh my gosh, what's next? A rifle pointed at me? I mean, that's what it felt like. It was alarming.
Don't joke. In 2020, we'll do that.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird, and I'm thinking, okay, there's nobody in here. You're behind glass. What's this great fear? Yeah. But that's how people are made to feel, and I know that a lot of it isn't necessarily based on what we know. It's what we're told to know. Yeah. So people are just reacting to the information we're given. That's all we can do. So when I'm told wear a mask and be 6 feet apart, but if there's nobody in the room, of course you don't have to concern yourself with that. But apparently you do in some places. Yeah. Even if there's nobody in there. Yeah. So it's weird.
You're trying to figure out what somebody's comfort level is. You're trying to figure out what a new etiquette is, and you're trying to do that within a culture of. There's so much competing information and misinformation out there, and everybody's trying to sort through that. And so, we're doing some odd dances around.
And the reason I bring that up is because those feelings are happening in the congregation.
Of course they are. Every Sunday we're doing this.
So it's the same. You got the guy like me who thinks there's nobody around. I don't have to have my mask on. I'm just going to walk across the room. But then you got another person who's thinking, "Oh my gosh, you don't have your mask on," and those conflicting feelings, extremes, are in the congregation. And it's why it's one of the reasons pastors are struggling, because they don't know who to stand with, and they don't know how to stand with both.
So this is one of those areas where, there are a few core ethics that ought to drive the people in the church, and love is one of them. And so this is where I feel totally comfortable pushing back on whatever partisanism is out there. And part of this is I'm politically homeless anyway. I don't belong to the right or the left. And so I've never really felt comfortable in those conversations anyway. But love ought to drive what we do in the church. And whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat, love still drives us the same way. And when you come in the door of our church, even if you think that COVID isn't a big deal, well, it's a pretty low bar that I'm asking you to clear, to put a mask on and to sit in a way that is socially distanced, so that, okay, if it turns out that COVID is a bigger deal than we thought, we've been acting the right way. All of the other people that are sitting around you that are scared literally for their lives, like, this is a loving thing to do for them. And in terms of what it looks like to love is supposed to be self-sacrificial. Jesus told us as his disciples, you're going to be known by your love for one another. And the standard of that is that you love as I loved you, which was a self-sacrificial love. Putting
I care
on a
about
mask,
your benefits. I care about you being taken care of.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wearing a mask is a pretty small ask when we're
It
talking
is.
about self-sacrificial love. And so, as partisan and divided as everything is, that has been the way that I've tried to progress things forward. We're not going to talk about the partisan idea here. I'm going to appeal to love to try to get us to move in that direction.
Yeah.
What does love look like?
Yeah, you're right. Let me just briefly go through those 6, and then we'll go back to the article. I just want people to hear these. So these are the 6 reasons why some pastors may resign soon after the COVID crisis. So this is the article we're highlighting is referring to. So these are the 6. 1, some are just worn out. The stress of the first days of COVID may seem like 100 years ago, but the same pastors who worked nonstop for months still face the stress of almost daily changes. Some are hanging on right now because of the crisis, but they're losing steam. And I'm not going to go through the whole things of all these. I'm just going to go through the highlights. Number 2 is some were already wrestling about their role prior to COVID. So the COVID just gives them one last straw, Then number 3 is some were already talking to another church prior to COVID, or they've begun the conversation in the last few months, which is kind of like number 2. Number 4, some pastors of churches struggling before COVID are now facing the reality of their church struggling even more, which is what you brought up. And then number 5, some I fear will resign because of marital and family issues exacerbated by the stress of these days. Boy, that's a big one, right?
Oh my goodness.
I know I'm getting on my wife's nerves. I hope she still likes me. Some, and this is the last one, some, particularly those who did not quickly learn to shepherd their church from a social distance, may have lost a bit of their heart for the congregation.
That's hard, but that's true.
Yeah.
I think everybody's trying to figure out what it looks like to have meaningful relationship in a COVID environment. And it is different and it's not easy. One of the things we were just discussing, and it goes to number 6, how do you do prayer meetings in a COVID environment? Are we gonna Zoom prayer? What does that even look like? It's one of the ways we're adapting.
Well, we also have, for example, in our situation, I don't know what kind of ministries you have for your church as far as outreach and that kind of thing. But for the Salvation Army, we're very social in our ministry. Just a part.
That's your sweet spot.
Yeah. So we have a diner where we feed people every night, and often we have volunteer groups and churches, Sunday school classes, organizations. They come in and they provide a meal and they serve. But ever since the COVID things happened, we serve outside and we use to-go boxes like the things. But then here's one of the stresses that comes up in our situation now, is there are other organizations around us who are not as, I don't even know how to say this without being offensive, so I'm not going to say it. There are some who are opening their diners, like in other organizations that feed the homeless. And they're letting people come in.
Yeah.
And so now that makes us look like we're not as caring.
Yep.
Because we're still outside. Then it's going to get colder, starting to get colder. But we still have this COVID problem. In fact, in our county, in Sebastian County, where I am in Arkansas, we have the highest numbers in the state. So while others are opening and we're remaining serving outside,
Sure.
as a pastor,
Yeah.
that adds guilt to my
Mhm.
plate. You know, so what do? Do I expose our volunteers and our staff to the possibility of catching something because now they're inside? Or do I continue serving with as much love as I can pour out as representing our organization, the Salvation Army, by continuing to serve outside? It's
Right.
all of these things are stressors, you know.
Yeah.
And then right now we have a store, for example, we have a family store, which is a thrift store, and it holds its own, but that's about it. It provides low cost clothing and things like that, but it doesn't really make us any money.
Right.
Half the time it costs more
Mhm.
for us to have it than it does. Then, in the midst of this thing, suddenly the city decides we're going to work on the street outside your store. Right? I mean, like, oh my gosh, we're already, you know, we're already barely hanging in here, you know.
Yeah,
And so
thanks, no
all of this,
thanks.
man. But see, in the past, before this stuff, that stuff was a glitch.
Sure.
You know, we work that out. You know, maybe we move over here or we do something different. You know, but under the circumstances, the stresses
Yeah.
are so high that the emotional energy required to make great decisions
Nobody
is
has it.
hard to muster.
Yeah.
You know.
So you were talking about this, however many weeks ago it was. I mean, what you're describing is depression and symptoms of depression.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I mean, there's a ton of people out there that have symptoms of depression and they don't even know that that is what they're wrestling with. But COVID has kind of brought some of those things, if not to light, like everybody understands it now. And so when you say, I can't
Yeah.
muster the wisdom that I need to make the decision, like,
Yeah.
yeah, I hear you. And
That's
this is the year
that's
where
right.
we have the most decisions to make
Yes. And
on
I
a
think it's
daily
that
basis.
depression that you're saying, and people
Yeah.
don't realize that's what they're suffering with.
Oh, sure.
And you
I
know, so
just thought I
we're
was
actually,
tired.
yeah, yeah. I just thought I was tired, and it just got too much going on. And you know, then you have some of our brothers and sisters who are more charismatic. You know, that if it's not a broken arm, you know, that you can see, like nobody even in the charismatics or say your arm's broken, but you just need to pray about it. They say go to the hospital. But whenever you have something like depression, oh, that's a spiritual weakness, you know. So then that
Yeah.
packs on more guilt,
Yeah.
you know, and it is just nonstop. This huge spiral of anxiety and depression and guilt and concern and worry, and you got staff that are depending on us, and we're trying to figure out how do we balance all of this? How do we keep things at some semblance of success and ministry? You know, yeah, and balance all that. It's hard, and that's what this article is about. This is
Oh,
what
it
he's
is
talking.
about that. Yeah. I mean, you just brought it's a can of worms, but
Yeah,
what does success in ministry look like in a COVID environment?
yeah,
I mean, that's a conversation all of itself in a normal year. What is success in ministry? And I don't know that the American church is very good at defining success in ministry. I live in the land of the mega churches, you know, where Willow isn't far, Harvest isn't far. All of those are right around me. And so up here, you tend to define success in terms of like numerical metrics is the definition of success. Well,
yeah,
how are you going to do that in COVID? Is it the number of likes on the video? Because it isn't going to be by the number of people in seats. Not
no,
not this
no.
year. It isn't. Are you going to do it by your bottom line? Is it now an economic question? Well, that's patently unbiblical.
And you still have those people putting the pressure on you, saying,
Oh my goodness.
"Why are there only 4 people watching your video right now?"
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
There's the pressures, you know, and I'm telling you, people can only go so long
right.
feeling like everything they do is an abject failure,
Yeah.
you know, before the depression takes them over.
Yeah.
That's the definition of burnout. Burnout is defined by doing something nobody cares about.
Yeah. Or at least the feeling of that.
Yes, that's the burnout. Burnout is everything I do, nobody cares.
Which he highlights. I mean, this is why he's saying both of the articles highlight that idea of feeling disconnected from your people. Why am I doing all of this work? Why am I studying this hard? Why am I preaching these things? Why am I figuring out how to do podcasts? All of these kinds of things when I feel disconnected from you. I mean, the easy answer would be, I'm trying to reestablish connection, but it doesn't feel like that. Right now, you and I, we're having a meaningful conversation, but everybody who's watching us, they're not interacting with us. They're watching us on a screen. And so does that count as some kind of connection? Well, I feel the connection with you because you and I are talking right now, John.
Right.
But I don't feel connected to anybody who's watching us because I can't see them. I'm not hearing them. And so connection even looks different and feels different in a COVID environment. All of this is different.
Yeah. And in our studies, you and I learned all about Gene Twenge talking about that there's a lot of communication going on online and all this, but there's no connection.
No.
I learned it was probably about 10 years ago. I went to go visit somebody in a jail.
Yeah.
And before this time, I think it was about 10 years ago. When you visit somebody in jail, they come, there's a screen between you. You grab a phone. You've seen this on movies and stuff. And you're talking, you're right there together, and you can talk to each other. Now it's like this.
Yeah.
So what does that do even for a prisoner?
Yeah.
It takes away that needed human connection. And we're doing this with everything now.
Yeah.
So the human connection that we need that gives us energy. And I know we can talk about love languages, and not everybody loves touching and all that stuff. So I'm not talking about that. Sure. I'm talking about just basic human interaction where you're actually filling the same space.
Yeah. Turns out that matters.
It matters a lot, and it's interesting that, people knew this way back when the Bible, the New Testament was being written, and said, don't forsake the gathering together of the saints. It's not enough to write a letter to each other. Right. Come together. Come together.
Dissertations are starting to be written on the whole idea of, if you go to a video venue for church, does that actually count? Because you're not actually having time with your pastor. He can't shepherd you
multi-campus,
like the all multi-campus. Of that. Yeah. And so, COVID, I think, is going to bring more of that discussion to light because how in the initial shutdowns that everybody had to do, the only way to connect was digitally, unless a pastor, and I don't know anybody that actually did this, unless a pastor would go to each house, stand across the yard and preach an individual message at each house.
Right. It would probably have helped if somebody did some research on how did ministry, as far as the preaching ministry, not the outreach and the service ministry, but I'm talking about preaching, teaching ministry. How did that go on during the plague?
Yeah.
Right? During the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
What did that look like?
So there are some articles that you can find about that, interestingly enough. But even as I was joking just a moment ago about going house to house, how one of my favorite historical Christians at the moment is Richard Baxter. Because he's like the poster child for catechism, which is where all of my research is. And that's exactly what Baxter did. Every day he was going to the house. He was
a visiting master.
He was a visiting master.
Yeah.
So you and I are already feeling guilty about how we do or don't do ministry. I'll just add that we should have been Richard Baxter all along. And
Yeah. I mean, that was his thing. Like his book, The Reformed Pastor. That book is about the visiting ministry.
It is.
How do you care for your parishioners personally and familially, individually. How do you do that? And he was the master of
he
that.
was.
So,
maybe that's what we should do.
well, there's a statement here that says, well, I want to say on August 31st, this is part of that article as well. So let me bring that back in.
Yep.
Let me see if I can bring that in there. There we go. So it says on August 31st, which is this part here. On August 31st, Tom Rainer wrote, well, got to get it back. Hold on. It's taking me to different links there. Sorry, Tom Rainer's name. On August 31st, Tom Rainer wrote, please hear me clearly. The vast majority of pastors with whom our team communicates are saying they are considering quitting their churches. It's a trend I have not seen in my lifetime. Some are just weeks away from making the announcements.
Yeah.
Right, the announcement. And and then this is the main thing that I want to get to, where he says our pastors are in the middle of a battle that most believe they cannot win.
Yep.
This is what I was talking about when I was mentioning burnout.
Yep.
You know, because burnout's a serious thing.
It's real.
Issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where I minister here, I was on a conference call, a Zoom meeting, actually. It wasn't even a conference call, with a whole bunch of pastors cross-denominationally. And so there are some Lutheran guys in there. There's a Catholic guy in there. One of them was a charismatic guy. And if I could summarize what I was hearing from them, it's exactly that ministry was already hard. And now the goalpost keeps moving in this COVID era, and they don't even know what a win looks like, let alone have the belief that they can actually win. They don't think they can win.
Yeah.
And it's true. Ministry is hard. Anybody who gets into ministry thinking that it's going to be easy, like that is a foolish end, and that dream will shatter the moment you get in your first church.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. Let's look at that passage from Luke chapter 9. And these are a few examples of people who said, hey, I'm with you, JC. I want to go follow you, and I want to do what you're doing. You know, it's like the guy, the John Maxwell. You know, John Maxwell says that he always has, inevitably, he has some young person who comes up to him after his talk, for which he gets paid like $80,000 for an hour talk. You know? And they come up to him and they say, I want to do what you're doing.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I bet you do. But do you want to, he says, but do you want to do what I did to do what I'm doing?
Right.
Right? I mean, it takes a lot. And so this is what Jesus is basically saying here in this passage. So they went to this village. That's what's in verse 56. Well, we're starting at verse 57. It says, and they were walking along the road. Or as they were walking along the road, a man said to him, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus replied, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. So there's a first warning. This isn't a vacation.
No.
Then he goes on. He said to another man, follow me. So this time he gives the invitation. But that guy replied, Lord, first let me go bury my father. And Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God. So, you know, if we got into the exegesis of that portion of the passage, of course, we'd be talking about second burial systems and, you know,
all kinds of things. Yep.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. But the point is, do you want to follow me or not? You know, this isn't a time for, you know, for other things. This is, you either follow me or you don't. And then still another said, this is verse 61, and we're almost finished here. I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family. And Jesus replied, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service and the kingdom of God. And of course, Jesus isn't being mean.
No.
He's letting them know right away what you're asking to get into.
Yeah.
It's not a vacation. You know, it looks good on television when those guys, you know, that have these huge churches and these big teams around them. But those are like NBA players. They are few and far between. The vast majority of pastoral ministry is difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's unrewarding, earthly speaking.
Sure. I would say it's
right?
actually got a great reward, but you're not going to
Yeah,
see it now.
that's right. So and it feels to our flesh, it feels unrewarding. You feel unappreciated. It is not easy.
Right.
And if we are called to follow Jesus, then we're called to take up a cross and deny ourselves and follow Jesus. We're not, it doesn't say pick up your recliner
No.
and look out for you and
No.
follow me. But that's
No.
what we hear. That's what we want it to be. Suffering is a part of this thing.
If they hated me, they're going to hate you. And when they hate you, remember that they hated me first. I mean, this is what Jesus is saying to his disciples. And that's going to be true in the world. The difficulty is, when you read throughout the New Testament documents, as hard as we have things from a worldly perspective, dealing with the culture outside of the church, it's not like Christians are always great at being nice to one another within the church. And so Paul's writing all of these letters, even the nice letters. When you look at the letter to the Philippian church, for example, even there he's saying, Euodia, Syntyche, get along. And I mean, how many pastors have had to tell their people, look, just share your toys and play nice in the sandbox? I just want you to be good to one another.
And you and I know, just like other pastors who are going to watch this or maybe watching this now.
Yeah.
When we look at old pictures of churches and you see the choir and they just look so beautiful, but we know that in reality, the lady up there in the corner is really mean, and the kids can't stand being around her. She's so legalistic. And that guy over there that sings bass, he's been struggling with alcoholism for 20 years.
His whole life.
Yeah. His wife finally left him because she got tired of him hitting her. And all those
church ministry.
Yes, that's church ministry. It is not a bunch of perfect people getting together.
Good thing, because neither am I.
We just dress up, but it doesn't make what's underneath,
any different.
Perfect. It's like I was watching the intro of Larry the Cable Guy, on this comedy thing, and he comes out and he says, I always picture people naked when I first come out, not because I'm nervous, but because I'm a pervert. And he said, by the way, you need to put your clothes back on. And so he's making fun of people. But the reality is, if you want to know what people are really like, you got to go where the sausage is being made. And the clothes make us look pretty. The packaging makes us look pretty, but underneath are people.
People are people.
And everybody in that church knows they're people.
Yeah.
So when we call them hypocrites or whatever, everybody knows this is a difficult thing.
Well, I mean, the amusing thing is you're describing life in a normal circumstance. That's what life is always like. 2020 seems to have this unbelievable way of bringing to light the worst of us all. 2020 has not been... it has not been kind to us. We haven't been kind to each other in 2020.
No. Hey, Gordy, have you met my wife? Smell like this.
Hi, Stacy. So here's the good news.
I can hear him.
Your husband says all kinds of nice things about you, even when you're not around, and even when there's no chance of you hearing about it until a moment exactly like this.
Aww.
And so take heart. That guy actually likes you.
Well, I'm glad because
I do.
It's been a long time, so he better, right?
He does.
Right. All right.
He glowed about you. Oh, it's good to meet you too.
And this is my daughter Ella.
Hi.
Hello. There you are. So
Hi.
I've heard all kinds of good things about you two.
He lives near
You have.
Chicago.
I have. Your dad likes you too.
Good.
It is good.
Wow.
It's always fun to put faces with all the stories that I've been hearing about those women for 3 years now. It's good to finally see them.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Let's see. Can you
That was
still hear
one
me?
of the things. Oh yeah, that was one of the things that I liked about our cohort. I didn't get to meet everybody's family, but I sure felt like I already knew them.
Yeah. Yeah, we had some crazy guys in there too, didn't we?
Yeah.
I felt sorry for the one female. I mean, she had to put up with everybody.
Tiff was tough.
Yeah, tough lady.
She'll be all right.
That's right. That's right. Well, let's get through this a little bit more.
Sure.
So the pastors are in the middle of a battle. They feel like they can't win. A lot of them.
Yeah.
It's not everybody. But then he has 5 bullets here. He says people's attitudes have split very much on partisan lines,
That's it.
and that's causing a lot of pressure. For pastors.
Oh yeah.
Half the church is opposed to any reopening, and half the church is frustrated that we've opened at all.
Yep.
So, and we're struggling with that.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is I'm aware that people are growing weary of the entire pandemic. Some are scared to death, while others are convinced it's a hoax.
I have that reality in my church. Yeah.
Yeah. So trying to minister to both ends of the spectrum is exhausting.
Yeah.
And then
I don't. I don't try to
Yeah.
minister to both ends.
It's hard, man. I mean, it's just really, really hard.
Right.
Daniel Herner said on a comment, he said Tiffany is the best of us.
Daniel Herner is a wise man. That testimony is true.
That's right. The fourth one says, well, we didn't get the third one. The third one says many of our congregants are still scared and unwilling to come out of their houses, no matter what we choose to do for safety or choose not to do.
Yeah.
We're told by some group that it's too much or not enough. That's interesting because I know I have a friend who's a pastor of multiple church sites, like a multiple campus church.
Yeah, sure.
And he's the pastor of the campus pastors.
Okay.
And he said there are 4 of them, and he said that 3 of them opened, but the one nearest the military base in that area, they're not opening because the military are told, you are not to do this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And so they can't open. So that's an interesting dynamic when you have multiple congregations.
Yeah.
One you can't open, and the other 3 are open.
What do you even do?
Yeah.
That bullet point. I mean, there are still people that haven't come back to our church yet. There's a significant group of my church that I don't think that I'm going to see them until not only is a vaccine available, but until probably all of us have been vaccinated. I don't think I'll see them before then.
Hmm.
That's the reality in a COVID year.
Yeah, that is. The fourth one says, I desperately need time off, but with having to organize live streams, worship services, and Sunday school, I have no time to get away. I'm a one-person staff, and it's difficult to find someone willing to fill in for me. I've had 2 days off since Christmas. I have another friend who goes to a church. He used to be a pastor, and he's no longer a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
But his pastor knows he was a pastor. And so they built a relationship, and now he's finally somebody the pastor can call and say, please, can you preach for me this Sunday so that I can take off?
Yep.
And that's a large church. I mean, it's a church of about 250 people.
Yeah. Yep.
And this pastor has nobody.
Mm-hmm.
And by the grace of God, an ex-pastor started going to his church and befriended him and said, hey, if you ever need me, I'll be glad to help you. And he's taken advantage of that. So that's
you should. Absolutely, you should.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, you'll see, I mean, I have what we call a sergeant major, which is basically in most churches would be like a head deacon.
Okay.
And he preaches often, and he loves it. He's fine with it, and he's good at it.
Good.
So he probably preaches 1 to 2 times a month.
Yeah.
And during this stressful time, I'm like, that really helps me.
Yeah.
So he's a blessing. And then finally, the fifth one says, feeling disconnected from the people and their needs. Need encouragement.
That's it.
Aaron and her to hold up my hands.
Yep.
People to come alongside me. But I'm tired of virtual everything.
Yeah. So I think I don't know a pastor that doesn't feel that. Even the guys that are really good at doing all the virtual, all the time kinds of things, and that was a learning curve for our church. We were way behind the ball. But even those guys that are doing that stuff a lot, like they still feel disconnected. And we're meeting every Sunday. We figured out a way to do that well, socially distance well. But that group of people that I was talking about just a moment ago that I still haven't seen, I feel disconnected from them. And I hope that if they have needs, they make them known, because if they don't, I don't know how else I'm going to be aware of how to shepherd them well. I mean,
Well, what about youth ministry? We have kids, and we miss them. And then they're going to another church closer to their house that is having youth ministries.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, now pile the guilt on me. I mean, this is just a really difficult, trying time, and there's just no way around that.
No.
Yeah.
The fear, if you're ministering in a small church, the fear that if you do something or if you don't do something that you're going to lose people, for a lot of guys in small churches, like that can be a crippling fear. So if I don't start Awana right away, am I going to lose all those Awana families? What if I don't have youth group every week, or I have youth group only via Zoom and not in person? Am I going to lose the young families? I mean, that's especially hard when you're talking about children's and youth ministry, because young families are often the backbone of a church.
Yeah.
And so now you're talking about the livelihood of a church itself, and those are brutal questions to have to wrestle with. Yeah. But you have to wrestle with them.
Yeah, that's right. And he
Hence
has
the feeling
two
that you
highlights.
can't win.
Yeah, that's it. We feel like we can't win. And, what do we do? And people are depending on us to make the right decisions. But what are the right decisions? He says here, our pastors need us. He has two highlighted things. Our pastors need us, and we need our pastors. And so he says in this first heading, our pastors need us. And then he writes this letter. He writes a small letter. It says, fellow church members, you and I need pastors. They are our shepherds, defenders, and teachers. But right now, our pastors need us. Remember, they are members of our churches too. And by all indications, this part of the body is suffering. Unfortunately, this seems to be a self-inflicted wound. Paul wrote, no one ever hates his own flesh, but provides and cares for it. I'm afraid that for many of our pastors, this doesn't seem to be true.
Right, we're trying to work harder.
Yeah, I know this is just a little blog, he writes, but my appeal is that we all decide to be different. Not only can our churches not survive losing our pastors, it is our spiritual duty to do everything we can to stop this from happening. We can do better. We must do better. And then he says we need our pastors. And so now he's writing to the pastors.
Right.
He says, dear pastor, please don't quit. We need you.
Right.
I have spent over 3 decades in Christian ministry, and the last decade training those called into ministry. You have no greater cheerleader than me. I want to lean into this crisis and give a few bits of counsel. My prayer is that you receive these as words from a friend, not a critic. We need you around for a long time. And Gordy, I'd like you to go through those 5 so I can hear myself stop talking.
So number 1, he says, give yourself a break. I know that we act like you're our savior, but you aren't. Please don't hold yourself to this standard of perfection. No one knows what to do right now. We're all making things up, which is wonderful. And I actually had a couple of folks in my church say that. All right, if you open the doors, we're not going to leave. If you don't open the doors, we're not going to leave. Whatever decision you make.
That's great.
We're going to be okay. Yeah, I love those people.
That's very supportive. Yeah.
And then number 2, I have a really good elder chairman who has allowed me to do number 2, which is take a break. I know there's too much to do. You can't do it all, but trying to check every box is killing you. For your spiritual health, for your family, and for the church, step back and breathe. We thought this was a sprint. It's actually a marathon. Isn't that true? You remember when they were saying at the beginning of COVID that, oh, everything will be over by June?
Yeah.
June was months ago.
Man. That's right.
Number 3, find a friend. Jesus never intended for you to do this alone. If you are really alone, write to me. That's one of the best pastoral notes in this entire article.
Yeah.
That dude hit a home run right there. Number 4, do something else. Start a hobby. Read. He doesn't mean quit ministry and get another job. He means start a hobby. Read a book. Cook a steak. Dig a hole. Put a flower in it. That's great. This is why I read and watch movies. Stories are soul food.
Volunteer at an Elvis Presley shrine.
For example, you are endlessly fascinating to me.
That was so funny when you called it a shrine.
I don't know what else to call that thing.
It's a museum.
John's at the Elvis shrine.
Oh, that's funny.
It is funny. And then his last one is revisit your calling. This is great. Yes, you can do something else and make more money and have less stress. You always could. But there's a reason you choose the ministry. Let that memory refill your tank.
Yeah.
That's good.
You could do something else and make more money.
I mean, nobody gets into the pastorate for the money, or at least they shouldn't. But, tapping into calling, my whole philosophy of ministry, if you were to strip everything away and just get to the heart of it, my whole philosophy of ministry is when God calls, we go. That's it. And if you can recapture that, then suddenly all of this stuff around COVID and all of the discussions that you're having about, do we do this? Do we do that? How do we define success? If you're able to get back to when God calls, we go, then you're able to recapture the dynamic of faithfulness. Ministry is about and has always been about faithfulness to our Lord. And so what is the right answer? You might get something wrong at the end of the day, but the real question that I want to ask pastors is, were you seeking to be faithful to follow your calling? Were you seeking to be faithful to the ministry that you have? Have you been faithful to follow the Lord? And all of these other things, they kind of complicate the matter, and we can get so caught up in them that, man, it'd be great if we could just step back and take a breath and say, okay, for this season, what does faithfulness to the Lord look like? Chase that. Do the thing that looks like faithfulness, and leave the rest of the details that are killing you up to God. Faithfulness is what needs to drive us here.
Yeah.
And if we recapture that, we probably won't quit.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are still people getting into ministry now.
Yeah, right.
So it sounds like, if you're reading this article, it seems like everybody who's going to be a pastor is a pastor, and some of them are leaving.
Yeah, there's this finite number, and
there's still seminaries going on. There's still people graduating. There's still pastors being called, and congregations bringing new pastors in.
Yep.
So it's not like it's just all losses. In fact,
no.
That reminds me that we had a second article that we were going to look at briefly because we're coming up on our time. But I wanted to make sure that people saw this. And let's see. This is an article.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, from Facts and Trends, Lifeway. It looks like so it's a Lifeway article. Pastors are not quitting in droves. Now, the thing to know about this is this was written back in July of 2019.
Yep, different world, but it still matters.
So it still matters. And like he says, what you'll hear is that there's this epidemic of people leaving, like 1,700. Right here it says more than 1,700 pastors leave the ministry every month. He said that's one of the scares, but the truth is a lot different. He says the prevailing myth is 1,500 to 1,700 pastors leave the ministry a month. The promising truth is 250 pastors leave the ministry every month.
Yeah.
So That's
It's a fraction of
substantial.
what we thought.
Yeah. So that's good news. And he goes on, and I'll give you these highlights. He says, the good news in all this is, first, pastors aren't quitters.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. And then the second, he says, ministry is tough, but so are ministers.
Yeah. Gluttons for punishment.
Yeah. But the third one is that ministers need encouragement. So that's an important one. And in my dissertation, writing for my doctoral dissertation, I had some of these stats. Say 53% are often concerned about their family financial security.
Yeah, right.
48% feel the demands of ministry are more than they can handle.
Sure.
And 21% say that their church has unrealistic expectations of them. And then you have boundary issues where people,
all over,
especially people who live like in parsonages, where you'll have members of the church stop by your house to make sure you didn't move a picture from one wall to another. That your kids' feet. One even wrote that they had a member of the church that would sit in their house with binoculars and see what was going on in the house, and then came over to the parsonage, knocked on the door, and said, "You need to tell your son to get his feet off the couch. The church paid for that couch, and we need it to last."
No, what I need is a restraining order.
There's stuff like that goes on. Craziness that people don't know that pastors go through, and then let's see. I think that's it. That's all I really want to mention about that article. But it's a real issue right now that that pastors are stressed. And like you said, you brought out the point. And you're right that there's a lot of depression going on.
Oh goodness,
people are being concerned with suicide issues. We talked about that in our last
broadcast. Should be. That's real.
Suicides because people feel like there's no way out. What am I going to do with this? What am I going to do with this MDiv outside of the church? Where am I going to go to work?
This church and my family would be better without me anyway.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah, it'd be better without me. You can go, get on with your life. You'll get some good insurance money. Crazy thinking. People are not thinking rationally. No. And so we need to keep an eye on our pastors and our fellow pastors. For those of us who are. Yeah, that's right. Keep our eyes on each other. Well, I think that's about it. I think we've done enough damage for this. So, thank you.
The question
Gordy.
is, do we do anything good?
Yeah, and we can. What we need to do right now, you and I, is to encourage pastors that people have actually been through worse. If you were a first century pastor, the likelihood that your head will stay connected to your neck was a lot lower than it is now. It was Christians have been through worse. Christian pastors have been through worse. And we're not the first people to go through a difficult time. Somebody posted an article or something recently that talked about people who were born in 1900. They went through the First and Second World War. They went through the Depression. They went through the Spanish flu. All the things they saw, Vietnam and the Korean conflict. They went through all this. Yeah. And they didn't all fall apart. We've got to have some kind of recognition that we live according to the Spirit of God and not according to our fears.
You just defined recapturing faithfulness.
Yeah, that's what we have to do. Or we're going to end up in trouble. We try to do this on our own. So, would you pray, and then we'll close.
Oh, our Father, you are good, and you are good even in 2020, and even when it feels as though the world is falling apart around us, that every decision that we make is suspect. Father, when it seems like every decision, no matter how small or how big, has half of our congregations riding on it. Father, what we pray is that through your Spirit, you would fill us and give us wisdom, open up the eyes of our hearts so that we might see the world and reality rightly, and then fill us with your Spirit in such a way that we're empowered to work and to move and to minister in a way that glorifies you and builds up the body of Christ. And in so doing, may you be glorified. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Gordy. I appreciate it.
It's my joy. Have a good one, man.